It's a great pleasure to be with you here in Berlin, to thank the extraordinary Nicholas Berggruen for having hosted this event, one of the many great things he does around the world, and to say how delighted I am to see so many former friends and colleagues here. I always used to think when I was Prime Minister that it was bad enough listening to my own speeches without having to listen to the speeches of other leaders. So my apologies for putting you through this. And we were just saying that Europa nach der Krise is possibly a slightly optimistic title for this intervention. But nonetheless, I'll try and deal with both the crisis and the prospects of what happens afterwards and what I say to you. From crisis can come opportunity. Out of the European crisis can come the opportunity, finally, to achieve a model of European integration that is sustainable. But right now, this opportunity is heavily disguised. There is an old joke told about the stranger who asks the Irishman the way to his destination, is told, well, I wouldn't have started from here. And we might be tempted to say the same. My apologies, Peter. We might be tempted to say the same about the way to resolve this crisis, and it would be equally futile. So I shall resist the temptation of being the irritating Brit outside the euro, trying to tell everyone inside why it was a bad idea. First, because I don't think it is a bad idea. In principle, in the right political and economic context, a single currency along with the single market makes sense for Europe. Second, because in any event, we are where we are. There is relevance, however, in understanding why this crisis is so acute. It is because monetary union was in many ways an idea motivated by politics, but expressed in economics. So politics and economics had to be aligned. They weren't. So now in the midst of a crisis, they have to be. Countries whose economies are divergent have to converge. Since this requires a huge degree of integration in decision-making, the politics will then have to shift to catch up the economics. The economic union will imply a large measure of political union, and this is the post-crisis challenge. Before I address it directly, I make one remark about the crisis itself, and it is again about the politics and the economics. One odd but telling difference of opinion between Europeans and those from the investment community in US, China, and elsewhere is that the Europeans, by and large, believe the euro will stay. That is because they are focused on the enormous political will to ensure it survives. The outsiders, by and large, are deeply skeptical. That is because they're focused on the maths. The strategy so far adopted by political leaders, including by Chancellor Merkel, who has shown great skill and courage in handling this crisis, is entirely comprehensible as politics. It is to go step by step by a series of increments that are major, but do not deal with all aspects of the crisis simultaneously. So the ECB action and readiness to use outright monetary transactions has hugely helped the liquidity issue and given us some respite. But it doesn't fully deal with the solvency or growth issues that also dog the euro. The ESM is still untested, and whilst deficit reduction plans are absolutely necessary, austerity makes policies for growth tough. Indeed, sometimes it seems as if the public is being given the choice of austerity with reform or growth without reform. We need growth and reform. And we need liquidity, solvency, and growth all addressed together. Without this, and especially without growth, the pain of the adjustment in debtor countries is frighteningly hard, and several years of it may not be politically possible. This is, again, where politics and economics have to align. So the economics imply a strategy based less on incremental steps and more on what I might call a grand bargain argument or agreement that deals with liquidity per the ECB solvency with the necessary fiscal transfers, banking union, a large degree of fiscal coordination, far-reaching structural reform, and the backloading, not front-loading, of austerity plans to protect growth, and all of this at once. My feeling is that the only way ultimately confidence can be restored is with a fully comprehensive set of measures that convince markets and public alike that the fundamental issues have been overcome. The politics of doing this, especially here in Germany, are fantastically difficult. But the economics of not doing so are even more difficult. That is the immediate challenge. If it is overcome, then the politics of what comes next is also extraordinarily fraught. Put simply, there can't be the integration of large areas of economic policy, banking union, fiscal union, even the prospect of an EU treasury, without a commensurate political union. So inevitably now, along with the resolution of the immediate crisis, comes the investigation of what such a political union would look like. We should conduct this investigation with the lessons of previous efforts at integration in mind. I actually bear the scars of participation in the Amsterdam Treaty, the Nice Treaty, the Laeken process culminating in the Lisbon Treaty, and the 2005 EU budget negotiation when the UK had the presidency, the most difficult negotiation I ever participated in, and that includes the Northern Ireland peace deal. Many of those here today bear similar scars. Out of that experience, I would say there are two crucial strategic objectives which any negotiation for such a political union should strive to achieve. First, some differentiation in the speed of European integration is now inevitable, as members of the Eurozone seek to match political structures with integrated economic decision-making. However, how this is done is of huge import to the whole of the European Union. I can almost feel the relief in some Euro-federalist quarters and amongst most Eurosceptics at the prospect of a 2- or 3-speed Europe. But I would give a stark warning. If Eurozone structures end up with a Europe that is fundamentally divided politically as well as economically, rather than a Europe with one political settlement that accommodates different levels of integration, the EU as we know it will be on a path to breakup. So let's be blunt here and go straight to the UK position. It is massively in Britain's interests not to play short-term politics with this issue. Personally, I would like to see the UK take a constructive role in shaping this new union, recognizing the imperative of closer political union for the Eurozone countries and trying to keep the necessary divergence in economic decision-making between the ins and outs from spilling over into a complete divergence in political structures. It is a very tricky task, but it is an essential one if the UK is not to be sidelined and Europe to be without the active participation of such a large and significant member of the existing union. The negotiations over the proposed banking union and possibly over the new EU budget will provide an interesting test case of whether such constructive engagement can yield an optimum outcome. But naturally, the UK will expect this to be a two-way process. The rest of the European Union will have to understand and hopefully accommodate the UK's very special position in the financial sector. The second objective is that we should be heedful of why, when monetary union came into being, structures of full-scale political integration were not agreed. They were proposed, by the way. They just weren't agreed. And the reason still has validity as a sentiment today. Greater political integration is indeed inevitable. But any new political union has to balance, even more carefully than ever before, the nation state and European Union integration. This issue is the hardy perennial of debates over European political union. But now the union proposed for economic decision-making reaches right into the heart of decisions normally reserved for national governments and parliaments. And though the British are often standard bearers of the nation-state side of this debate, it is clear many march behind that standard. There is a reason for the referendum results in France and the Netherlands in 2005. And it wasn't just domestic politics overshadowing a European decision. And this has always been the dilemma facing the politics of the European Union. People feel far closer to national governments and parliaments. In the minds of the people, there is no plainly unified, homogeneous polity in the way that there is, for example, in the United States. Yet as Europe integrates, there opens up, therefore, this democratic deficit, namely the gap between the importance of the European-wide decisions and the accountability of the European institutions making them. Hence, there is the drive towards more Europe-wide democracy, at present formulated in ever greater powers for the European Parliament. And here is the dilemma. Though in theory, as Europe integrates, people should demand more Europe-wide democracy, in practice, because they still feel a far closer affinity to national democracy, they don't. So the European political elite does, but the people often don't. The danger is that the more we talk of bringing Europe closer to the people, therefore, the more the people feel alienated by it. And this dilemma is deepened by another factor pulling the opposite direction. As the union has grown in numbers, and as the complexity of decisions necessary for things like the single market has intensified, so for reasons of efficacy, Europe needs to have institutions that can rise above any one individual national interest. And that is why, despite frequent UK objections, more majority voting in some areas can be justified as even essential to make Europe work. Without it, we can get paralysis rather than movement. On the other hand, take an area like common defence policy, launched by the UK and France in 1998. Here there was acceptance that it should be done at a European Council level rather than through the Commission. So designing this new union will be very difficult. And let me make a few quick reflections. A Europe-wide election for the presidency of the Commission or Council is the most direct way to involve the public. An election for a big post held by one person, this people can understand. The problem with the European Parliament is that though clearly democratically elected, my experience is that people don't feel sufficiently close to their MEPs. This could change, but only if the European Parliament and the national parliaments interact far more closely. Relegating the European Council to a sideshow would, in my view, be a mistake. Even Eurozone members will look to their own governments first. But there are a myriad of ways of making the Council more open, its relationship with the Commission more transparent, and there could even be more explicit links between the European Parliament and the Council. We should also ask what political union really means. It doesn't mean simply a set of institutional common bonds. It means also that in the minds of people of Europe, there is a close connection between them. And this can't be legislated for. It has to be nurtured, culturally and socially as well as politically. One thing I am absolutely certain of, Europe will mean more to people and be supported more by them if Europe refocuses on practical issues that improve their lives in tangible ways. People understand the need for European action on jobs, on trade, on making the financial sector work for their interests, not against them, on common energy policy, a common struggle against illegal immigration and organised crime, even on common defence in a world of increasing security risks and declining defence budgets. I think they could be persuaded to understand the sense of common cooperation on higher education, on science, on research, on a much bigger scale than present efforts. Likewise with art and culture. If this were combined with a sensible push on subsidiarity, this could amount to a package that would work. So the balance will need to be struck. And if not, then the whole project risks failure. I can't see any new political settlement being acceptable without direct popular consent through referendums. So just imagine this scenario, which is why it's so important to get this balance right. Supposing we find the will finally to resolve the economics of the Eurozone crisis. Suppose we then agree the major future steps of political integration for European economic decisions as part of that resolution. Supposing we then push forward to a new framework of political union as a necessary part of that economic integration. At this point, we need to be reasonably confident the political union will gain consent. Because otherwise we will find ourselves with referendums lost and back in crisis, this time with no way out. In conclusion, I would like to make one final point amidst all this anxiety about crisis. The present situation is the most serious to have faced the European Union since its inception. And as we speak, despite the title, the crisis persists. But even so, we should recognize that the underlying profound rationale for Europe and its union is stronger than ever. This is a point I will make to a British audience in a speech in a few weeks' time. Ultra-Eurosceptics, by which I mean those essentially in opposition to the whole European project, are on the wrong side of history. The 21st century case for Europe is based not on war or peace, but on power or irrelevance. A 21st century with China and India that in time as GDP and population size realign will become vast economic and political powers. With Brazil and Russia behind, a country like Indonesia with a population 3 times that of Germany. Nations like Mexico, Pakistan, Nigeria, and Vietnam, all bigger than any European nation. In this new 21st century, in the geopolitics that it implies, Europe carries weight, multiplies opportunity, and makes sense for individual nations. So in its essence, despite the crisis, we take the long-term view of history, not the short-term challenge of this crisis. In the long term, in its essence, Europe is the right idea at the right moment of time and in the right geographical space between East and West. Our challenge now is, once we are through the crisis, to make out of that good idea a better reality. Thank you.